have empathy towards your tree. Hi, I'm Miltonchang of Bonsaiheirloom. Well, I thank you for tuning in to today's video because I'm sure you're attracted to the thickening of the trunk because that's the first thing we think about, the value, the age, the aesthetics, the thickness of the trunk. How do I make a substantial bonsai given my age and limited time, and what do I do? So I like to go over the techniques to thicken your trunk, increase your ramification, make your trees look respectable as quickly as you can. Of course, there is no real shortcut, but you can certainly shorten the development time. So let me be a little bit corny to say, if you want to start with a substantial trunk of a bonsai, start with a substantial trunk tree with a tree with a substantial trunk. What I advocate and what I do is to find out trees that already have a thick trunk to start with. So it could be a dilapidated tree that people didn't take care of, but they had it for many years. Or I dig up a tree that's got fair amount of growth with a thick trunk, or buy a 15-gallon can instead of 1-gallon can or 5-gallon can trees so that you start with a thick trunk. So for example, when you buy a landscaping tree, if you buy a 24-inch box, you may get a trunk already about this size. And it's a little bit painful because it's expensive to cut it down. But you can cut it down to about, I would say 50 to 75% of the height of the ultimate bonsai. Or you can air layer pieces to get multiple bonsai to get to the short size that you envision the tree to become. So you start with a thick trunk. Think of it this way. When you talk about the age of a bonsai, people tend to just say, well, this is a 50-year-old tree. That's because it's under training for 50 years. Wow, that's incredibly valuable. Just like today, I'm going to work on a Shinpaku juniper that's grown from a cutting for the last 75 or 50 years in some collector's collection. And I got it. I'm just like overwhelmed that I got that. But on the other hand, you can go out the mountain and take a 500-year-old tree. So you have a 500-year-old bonsai. Not really, but you only work on it for 10 years. So start with a big tree, a stump if necessary, and then provide the tree with the necessary ingredients. So, for example, dig the tree carefully out a year so that you have fibrous roots, if at all possible. The other one is to compensate the root loss by cutting off a lot of branches, and so on and so forth. So the first preoccupation is to keep the tree alive. Then you look at what are the necessary ingredients to keep the tree healthy. Well, first is you need good soil, and good soil means it's got good water retention ability and good aeration, that means porous material, so that it can keep the tree moist and also let the air in for the tree to grow. And the second one is, of course, you need water. And I think water is really not quite the word, it's really moisture. For example, if the root ball is dried out, you can water it. Water runs right out and you're not getting the tree water. So you want to make sure the root ball is always moist and supple just by touching it, or you can get a humidity or moisture measurement instrument. But I think touching it to see the soil is moist and supple is the easiest thing to go. And then you need to make sure you water it. And if the root ball is already very hard, then you need to put a basin underneath of it so that the water can suck up gradually to moisten the rest of the soil. Then fertilize. Fertilizer is very important. Every time my heart sinks when I see a nutritioned African child, so small compared to, it could be this big, they're only about this big because they're malnutritioned. And the same with trees. The tree is like human. If you don't feed it, the baby will suffer. Like human, if it doesn't get water, it dies. Like human, if it doesn't get air, it dies in the roots. And if it doesn't get sunlight, it doesn't have hydrolysis to get the nutrients, photolysis to get the nutrient. So think of it to have empathy towards your tree. When the leaf is a little bit droopy, it's getting thirsty. Just like you feel your mouth is just dry. Feed it, water it. It's simple-minded. I'm not a botanist, but I think logically to learn from my mistakes. And then the next thing is light exposure. That's really equivalent to fertilizer because photolysis makes the root grow, suck up the fertilizer, suck up the moisture to nurture the tree. So it's a really balance between the amount of, I call it evaporation, versus the amount of water that's being absorbed. If the sunlight is too strong, it dries out the leaves too quickly. It doesn't have time enough to suck out the moisture to keep the leaves green, and the tree suffers. So you want to do then is always balance the amount of exposure to the amount of shade that you provide and the amount of moisture you provide. I'm reminiscent of the comment about Japanese maple leaves always burn in the summer in Los Angeles area in Southern California. It really is true because many of the areas, the soil is subsoil, it's not very good drainage, so people water them sparingly so not to drown them, and so they dry it out really easily. In areas where people planted the Japanese maple with a lot of good soil mixture and deep planting, and they water a lot, it actually stays green all summer. So again, it's a balance between all these parameters. So then the other trick to make your tree grow fast is to plant in a pot or plant in a bonsai pot or plant it in the ground. If you plant it in a bonsai pot, you can provide enough care to make it grow fairly rapidly so that you can have a lot of opportunity to reshape it and prune it and wire it and so forth. So they can look nice, but they are not likely to thicken the branch very much. So the next best thing is to plant it in a nursery pot, oversized nursery pot, water a lot, fertilize a lot, and you have plenty of opportunity to prune it as well. You get the best of all three worlds, right? And then lastly is to plant it in the ground. Obviously, it has so much area for the nutrient and water and so forth. It grows the fastest. So in the past, what I've done is that the first few years I put it in a nursery pot, of course. When it gets to, let's say, a 5-gallon pot size, it's substantial enough to put in the ground. I let it grow for 5 to 10 years and dig it out and nurture it in a, let's say, 15-gallon can and or 7-gallon squat, and then let the roots recover and the branching comes out to reshape it. That's what you see most of my trees. I think everything is a trade-off. The downside of putting in the ground, which grows fast, is that there's a setback when you dig them up. Invariably, the roots suffer, and you also stand a chance of losing the tree. So I tell you, the best method I come up with, the bottom line, is to plant in a nursery pot, slightly oversized. Bury it maybe 2 to 4 inches below the surface, so the roots will grow out of the drainage hole. You can even maybe cut more holes, so that it's got the best of both worlds. All you have to do is just cut around where the roots come out. You can pop it out of the ground, take it out of the pot, work on it. You will find the roots are pretty well filled and easy to clean up to put in a bonsai pot. So in conclusion, don't put it in a bonsai pot too early. And the best approach is to grow them in a nursery pot, but bury it somewhat to encourage the roots to grow out. And the third best way is to grow the tree when a certain size into the ground and dig it up later on when it's thick enough. But while you work on it though, every year you spend a few minutes clipping it to shape. And the last one, the technique is to understand that the trees pointing up is likely to, the branch that's pointing up is likely to grow the fastest. And the branch on the top of the tree is likely to grow the fastest. So that's the word apex. When you can cut back the apex to a fairly short branch, in a sense, a bud, but it will grow fairly fast to thicken to rhyme with the rest of the tree. And then the second thing you can do is that, going over a little bit of detail, let's say if you get a 15-gallon tree with a trunk about this size, you eventually cut it to about this tall because you want the tree to be the bonsai to be this tall ultimately. What happens when you cut it here is that branch will shoot out everywhere, and the bottom ones will likely to grow more. And so what you can do is that let it grow longer, and then you take the tip and you bend it up to point upwards, and that's called sacrificial branch, because that branch will eventually cut off, and then you have a thick lower branch. So you do that, you will have thicker lower branch, more taper. So the process will be the following. You can get an upright tree by cutting off to be this high and then let it grow up, and you will have branches on the side to grow to the side branches. The other way I like to do that very often, that's why you see some of my trees are very dramatic, is I take a tall tree, I cut it back to the bottom, and then branches are growing out everywhere, and I pick one to make that the apex. And then later on, when I take it out of the ground, I tilt it so that this is the apex, and then I cut it again and cut it again. So at the end, I will have a tree that's going like this to be three-dimensional, and the branches growing out, resulting in having good taper between the cuts, between the branches. So that's how you create a natural-looking bonsai, and yet it's within your vision of imagination. With that in mind, I'm pretty much exhausted the topic, but let me summarize with the bottom line. The bottom line is start with a bonsai with some age, a stump ideally, so long as it's an interesting shape to build upon. It doesn't have to have very interesting shape because the word is built upon, because this is additive technique, cut and grow. Cut to the core in terms of the shape and let it grow. Keep in mind the age of a bonsai generally is like age of the tree plus the number of years in training. So start with the old stump is to your advantage. And lastly, water and fertilize regularly. Put it in an oversized growing pot, somewhat buried in the ground and in full sun. And that's how you get your respectable bonsai trees very quickly. I thank you very much. Please share this, I think it's a very useful video with a bonsai friend, as well as introduce a concept to somebody interested in gardening and houseplants and orchids to migrate them into our community, a bonsai community. So I thank you very much, and click like to give me some encouragement. Subscribe to our channel and send us your email address for announcements. Thank you very much. See you next week.